All right, I'm sitting down with Richard Gibbens. Looking forward to this conversation. I was introduced to Richard by Tim Dane. I was working my way through MLS executives as much as I could to get somebody on the podcast that was willing to talk about kind of their perspective on technology vendors and how that's evolved over time and how they like to work with vendors. So create some empathy for vendors on what it's like in the day of the life of an MLS executive, but also vice versa for MLS executives to know what startups are going through and technology vendors are going through. So I was told by Tim that Richard is an up-and-coming MLS executive. He's doing amazing things and working his way through the industry very fast. He's been in the industry for 6 years now, and I'm looking forward to hearing his kind of fresher perspective. So Richard, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. So to jump right in, to get your background, how were you introduced to the space? Because I looked at your background. You did not necessarily come from a real estate background. You said you had a funny story here, so looking forward to hearing it.
Yeah, so I had got my MBA, and I had thought I wanted to get into project management, like military kind of stuff. And I had, no joke, applied for over 200 positions over about a 2-year period. And the majority of those were research the company, tailor the cover letter, tailor the resume, all the hard work you're supposed to put into these things, right? Nothing. I think I got 2 bites. Neither one of them went anywhere. So one day I'm on monster.com. I put out this app that was like a Tinder for jobs. And it was like, swipe left, swipe right kind of thing. I'm going through and I see this one that says MLS support, /IT coordinator. I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm kind of hating the spot I'm in now. I was at a call center, got bought out by a third party that didn't care about the customers, and I kind of hated it. So swipe right on it, thinking it was going to send me a link to apply. But what it did is it took my monster.com resume and sent it directly to the hiring manager. And that resume was out of date, had misspellings on it, and generally just the worst resume I've ever sent in my life. And that's the person who calls me back. So we go through the hiring process. I get the job, and I show up, and my introduction to the MLS industry was, there's Mike's computer, figure out what he did. And that was it. That was the extent of my training, because it was an association-owned MLS, and they had just gone through some rough times, had gone through something like 5 AEs in 4 years, and was just kind of in turmoil. And so the AE there was rebuilding the association and just needed somebody who could figure out the MLS. So, yeah, we 4.5 years there, and me and her, we did rebuild that association from the ground up. There wasn't anything that was left untouched, and it's one of the strongest associations in the state of Florida right now. So I'm pretty proud of that. And but it's just that. Just like what vendors kind of experience when you're coming into the space, a lot of times you have no idea what the industry is. So I've kind of been there.
Well, I was going to ask, did you know what an MLS was? When you saw that job listing, did you know what it was?
No clue.
Yeah.
My only experience in real estate was buying a house.
Yeah.
That's it.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Well, here you are, and this can be a great conversation because you've come in and flipped over an association, and you're doing great work where you're at now. So walk through when you decided to join the MLS and association with now, and kind of what the early days have been there, and then we'll go into kind of a day in the life.
Yeah, absolutely. So this MLS had hired Wade Group to come, and Maryland reached out to me because I love the work I had done back in Florida. They knew that I could kind of turn things around, and they wanted somebody here who could put them on the national stage, right? Because they've done cool stuff in Southwest MLS for a long time. I mean, they were separately incorporated 25 years ago, which was way ahead of its time to be a separately incorporated MLS and to separate out and have its own board. So. But they had never really had the reputation for it. So they brought me out here. So larger organization was a plus for it. And I kind of like what they were doing. It was a good fit. I was interviewing them as much as they were interviewing me. Since I've been here, there's been doing a lot of foundational stuff like bylaws, policies, rules, and regs. It's stuff that's not sexy, but it's foundational and important to get right. So that's been a lot of the work going on here. We've got some cool launches going on. I'll talk about those a little more later, but just really trying to push that envelope. And I have a board of directors that supports that, which is great. It's we're going to talk a lot about being a member-driven organization, but as long as the director and the board are kind of rowing in the same direction, it works similar-ish to a tech company. So
cool.
Yeah.
Walk through. Okay, now let's get to kind of the day in the life. You're a director of MLS there. Walk us through the things that are on your plate day to day. I'm sure it changes. There's a lot of things on your resume and on your LinkedIn you list that you're responsible for. Everything from graphic design to vetting vendors and policy, like you just said, graphic design and policy. There's not many other roles within a company where a person does graphic design and looks at policy. Right. So walk us through the day in life, because as a technology vendor or a new startup, I think it's important for us founders to know what you're going through.
Yeah, what it is now, and the analogy I use when I don't feel like spending an hour describing my job to people is I'm basically like a project manager, right? So board of directors brings to me with what they want to do, what they want to accomplish, and it's my job to communicate with the vendor to accomplish that, because I'm not a developer, but I speak it, right? Like, I understand logic, I understand programming, I understand databases, but I'm not writing a piece of code to save my life. So that's the majority of what I do, is managing these meetings, managing honestly the politics of the association side of things, and then converting that into usable language for developers, because developer people and politics type people speak two very different languages, right? And a lot of times it's also like, trying to cut off some stuff that the committee or board wants to do that would be a really heavy lift on the developer side. One of my favorite phrases is, why don't we just? Because usually when that comes from the politics side of things, it's immediately followed by something that'd be an incredibly heavy lift that they don't realize how hard it would be.
Yeah.
Like, for example, we're doing the integration with RentalBeast, and we're doing single add edit, but dual search. So you can search in either Flex or RentalBeast, and then the single add edit. Originally, they wanted dual add edit. And when you start talking about dual add edit, that is an incredibly complicated prospect, because you have to have the two systems talking across each other constantly, and it adds a whole nother level of complexity. So a lot of my job sometimes is talking to the communities like, hey guys, that's not a great idea, right? And the things like the graphic design and all that was in my previous position. I did a lot of that. I did a lot of the marketing. I managed the building, a lot of those things. Here, I can really focus on just MLS, which is nice. So the majority of my time is just doing that project management kind of stuff.
And give us an idea. So you're working at these board of directors. Who makes up that board of directors, and what does that makeup look like as far as their experience, either in the industry or with technology? So you can kind of give the audience here an idea of who you're working with.
Yeah, it's entirely realtors. So it's now I am very lucky this year. My president, Tigo Venturi, is a guy who has a lot more experience with tech than most realtors do, which helps. But I do spend a lot of time with my directors, trying to help them understand your side of the business, right? But conversely, they spend a lot of time helping me understand their side. I've never sold a house in my life, and that's something I try to keep in mind. I've also, the thing with entrepreneurs, and that's both realtors and, tech vendors, you guys wake up not knowing where your next paycheck's coming from. Yeah. I've never experienced that. So them helping me keep that perspective is also really helpful. And it's just, that's kind of the way position works, is kind of mending all that together.
Yeah. I love how you refer to realtors as entrepreneurs, because that's one of the core beliefs of Simba, my company, that we wanted to build our product around, was these are entrepreneurs. One thing I want to dig in here is sometimes I think, let's use government as an analogy, our U.S. government. As fast as things are moving, for instance, privacy with Facebook or artificial intelligence, sometimes we look at the government and say, are they capable of regulating these spaces as fast as they move and how technical they've become? Do we want to figure out a way to diversify and put people in place of government or separate committees that understand this technology so we can make faster decisions and more informed decisions about technology. Do you ever feel that way with working with board of directors that are all realtors and maybe none of them have tech experience, and how can they weigh really informally into these decisions? Do you ever feel that way? Is there maybe more improvement that can be done there, and how we in the industry structure these boards to make sure there is representation from realtors, which I think is most important, but also get some people on the board that maybe don't have a background as a realtor, but they deeply understand the real estate space, but have more of a technical background? Do you have any thoughts on maybe if the makeup of board of directors could change to be more tech forward?
Yeah, I think one best practice, and this is something we're working on, is getting outside board of directors and getting people who are not realtors, and, it can be, I've seen people do, tech folks. I've seen them do directors from other MLSs or CEOs from other MLSs. I've seen attorneys and accountants, and just getting that diverse perspectives, right? And we just last year actually added in the bylaws where the board has the opportunity to add 2 non-voting board members. We haven't done it yet, but it's in the bylaws now where we can. And there's a lot of other organizations that are doing great stuff with that. Like I know Triangle MLS is one that pops off the top of my head that has some outside directors. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a best practice in business just in general. And I think MLSs need to treat themselves more as businesses and less as data associations. It's kind of the joke that I use. It's if you think too much on that association side, it's easy to get bogged down in stuff that doesn't matter, and you end up playing chutes and ladders while your competitors are out there playing chess.
Yeah.
So,
last question on the board of directors here. Who chooses them? Is it a vote of current members, or how does that board get constructed?
Yeah, it's all current members. In our case, it's participants. So it's the people who actually own the brokerages, depending on what you call it in your state. In our state, it's called a qualifying broker. So the participants at Southwest MLS do the voting.
Yeah, got it. So you mentioned you're a project manager. You can touch a lot of things in a given day. I'm sure there's a lot of things pulling your time. What are some things you wish you had more time for that you'd love to focus on?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of things that a lot of people wish they had more time for that I actually make time for, like personal growth, for example, or training more direct reports. Spending time communicating with the board of directors. One of the things that makes my relationship with the board of directors work so well is because I am so open and transparent, put a lot of time and effort into that. One thing I do wish I had more time for, or maybe could hire somebody to do it for me, would be kind of the more data intensive stuff. Like there's some cool things going on out there with, like, for example, CRMLS is doing some stuff with like heat mapping, using showing data and sales data and combining it to kind of show sales in areas and things like that. And that stuff that's not hard to do if I could just sit down and take the time to do it, right? Those kind of data projects, deeper market analysis, or just, building the reports that show those things in an interesting, visually interesting way. And that's the stuff that is fun, but I just don't have the time for, honestly.
Yeah, I got it. Now, you're a director of MLS. You've worked your way up through several positions, both at your previous MLS, and you worked your way to this role. Talk about how people in your position move upward. So what's the upward mobility look like for staff within MLSs, and how do you think about that personally?
You pretty much have to move. Unless you're at some of the larger ones, like the top 20 or so, they have large enough staffs where there's movement around there. But there's roughly 540 MLSs in the country now, and I think 20 of them probably have upward mobility within the MLS. So the only position that's quote unquote above me here is the CEO of the association, and I have zero interest in that. It's because that's, you're getting on the association side of the business with the parties and awards and political advocacy and education and all the things the associations do, which is extremely important, but zero interest to someone like me. Right. So, it's, you kind of have to move. I went from an 1,800 member organization to a 4,500 member organization here. Logically, the next step is probably going to be somewhere else, but, you just kind of, my personal philosophy is building legacies and not just moving to the next thing. So, I'm never going to leave any organization in the middle of anything. When I leave, it's going to be set to go. So
Yeah.
And that makes for an interesting dynamic, right? Because it's not a secret. It's the way things are, but you just manage that.
Yeah. And talk about the broader kind of org chart within an MLS. So, for instance, for a startup, brand new to the industry like myself, when I look at MLSs, they're all so different. Are there certain patterns when it comes to org charts within MLSs, and who are some of those more common roles that maybe every MLS has?
Yeah, so like you're always going to have. We kind of break it down into three things. And similar to my old one, you have kind of support, which is just people calling in, they need help, listing changes, stuff. You have compliance, which is of course a core foundation of the MLS. Because the fact that we have a group of people who all agree to abide by the same rule set and then enforce that rule set is, in my opinion, the true value of the MLS. And then you have, IDX and data syndication. So you can kind of break that into three things. And some places split that up between people. Most MLSs, like mine, like I have me and two people. So I can't split that up. We all kind of do all three, right? Now, in my case, I usually stick IDX to myself and one of the people, so that way I don't have to, that doesn't be quite so broad, because it's such a, the questions people ask in that space, you have to know what you're talking about to answer them, right? So, you'll usually have one person who kind of focuses on like the data feeds and stuff like that, but then compliance and support is split across all three of us.
Got it. And then what determines the size of an MLS or of an MLS's staff? I'm sure it's number of members and thus the fees, but dive into that a bit and maybe how that changes from MLS to MLS.
Yeah, I mean, of course, number one is budget, right? And you have your number of members, and we are. MLSs are very much a subscriber fee based, right? But then you also get into like how efficient an MLS is at handling compliance and processes. Like 4,500 people for us to only have 3 is pretty lean, actually. And I mean, and part of that is, of course, the association is handling your things like your marketing, and there's a CFO, and they handle education, and the association handles lockboxes. So us 3 are purely just those 3 MLS functions. But 4,500 versus 3 is still pretty lean. And that's because we have processes in place that help us do that. We use Listing Data Checker, which automates a lot of the compliance process for us. We're utilizing RESTB.ai as part of the compliance process, bringing some computer vision into that. We probably could have a better ticketing system, but we have a process in place that helps us kind of share that. Because I've seen places that are in MLS that are half our members with twice the staff. And that's because they're doing a lot of those things I just named manually.
That's super interesting.
Creates a lot of work.
That's amazing. Off of that, where do you think we are in the adoption of AI within MLSs? And let's stick to that. Within MLSs, are we first inning? What's your thoughts there?
We're heading in the right direction, and one of the things I like to tell people, like when they look at AI these days, they're like, okay, it's doing this cool thing, but here's all the stuff it can't do. Well, I want to say it was 1896, what is widely considered the first organized automobile race, the cars had a top speed of 11 miles an hour.
That's
right.
Yeah.
You got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So if right now if AI is going 11 miles an hour and race cars right now are doing 200 plus, it's going to get there. So the thing that we are working on in the MLS space is the foundational parts of making that work together, right? So another story I use is imagine, and the key to this story is every piece of technology that I'm going to mention throughout this process exists. So you walk into a house, you open all the doors, you turn on all the lights, you let a drone go. The drone automatically flies its way through the house, takes a bunch of video. You take that video back to another product. That product pulls stills out of the video, chapters them for you, and then has, of course, the video as well. Then you have computer vision read all those images and pull all the tags out to get the features of the home. You take all that data, plug it into ChatGPT, and get your remarks filled out, and then all of that goes into the MLS, and you click a button, and your MLS listing is done.
And I'm sure there's some kind of maybe point cloud technology that can build a floor plan that you can maybe virtually walk through that's attached to the drone. I mean, I don't know if we're there yet with that, but that's, foreseeable for sure.
Yeah, but every single piece of that technology exists. The auto driving drone exists. The taking the video, making stills exists. The computer vision exists.
I think Amazon just bought one of those drone companies, I think recently too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I remember that.
But what's missing in all of this is the standards to make them all talk to each other, right? And that's what the MLS is working on. So like, for example, there's a lot of people doing like, upload the photos first, feed some of that stuff into the listing, and then finish the listing. Like I know Bridge MLS is doing that, for example. I think they use Dynaconnections, I believe. But a lot of the MLSs aren't built that way. We have this process of choose the property type, here's the listing, upload the media after. And to put the media first takes some pretty fundamental changes in how your database works, right? And that's the part that MLSs are working on, and that's where AI is great. I love computer vision. I love what we're doing with Listing Data Checker. But the incorporating it is the stuff that's the work in progress. And once that's done, it's going to open up like crazy from there.
Yeah. So let's say in this example, you've got all these amazing new technologies, AI driven is what we're talking about right now. These pop up. You as an MLS director, are you working closely with, I guess, the vendor that's providing you the MLS technology? So in your all's market, who is that?
So our MLS vendor is FBS.
So give us an idea. You're working with FBS and you want to incorporate some kind of AI technology. Are you working with their tech team? And if you are they weighing, okay, this market wants this update, let's go talk to the rest of them? Or do you kind of have a dedicated instance of FBS in your market that you have a lot of control over? Give us a sense of working with these MLS vendors and kind of your ability to customize it to your particular market. Or is there kind of this tug and pull between this market wants this, do the rest of them want it? So let's kind of gauge if this is worth our dev time. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the challenges of any vendor in the space, whether it's an MLS vendor or just like, I don't know, CMA vendor, it's balancing that scalability of being able to roll out the same product to everybody, but also being able to customize it, right? And that's something that Flex does a really good job on. They kind of have their core product, and their core is difficult to change because that's the same for everybody. But then beyond that, your fields are flexible. You can add and remove fields pretty easily, things like that. So now when you start talking about incorporating AI, or in our case, the integration with RentalBeast, where you're doing, single add, edit, dual search, that's actually talking about the core product. And yeah, I do work very closely with both sides. We have pretty often meetings right now as we do this integration with, RentalBeast and Flex and me. We're all three on the call figuring out what needs to happen, right? And FBS is a terrific partner with that. But there is kind of a critical mass component to it too, right? Like one of the reasons I know that I'm able to kind of get this moving along as a 4,500 member organization is I know there's much larger organizations that want to do the same thing. Right. So because the vendor has to look at that. Is the juice worth the squeeze? If a 4,500 member organization comes along and wants this intensely a lot of dev time project, is it worth it for them? And I get that. I understand that.
Is there some back officing? Is there some kind of back channeling going on between you and the other directors and MLS executives before you approach FBS? And so you have kind of this critical mass immediately. Is that going on or not?
Not really, because it's just like the word I like with realtors is co-opetition, right? You're cooperating, but you're also competitors. It's kind of the same thing among MLSs. We're cooperating, we work with each other, but we're also competitors.
Interesting.
So, lobby bar conversations happen, right? But we're not doing it intentionally.
Where's the competition come in? And talk about that. Yeah. So like, you are in competition with maybe, let's just use a random example with an MLS in Florida. Is there any competition there? When you say competition, go into that a bit more.
So if you look at the MLS space, when I started 6 years ago, there was about 750. Right now there's 540. So there's definite shrinking, right? So although, there are areas that have overlapping market disorder, like I think a great example is FMLS and Georgia MLS. They are basically entirely overlapping with each other. So there's absolute competition there. Another one is Stellar and Miami Realtors. They're kind of butting up against each other. Now in New Mexico, we have 100 miles of desert between us and any MLS. So the competition there looks a little different because we're not directly competing for listings or members. But if you look long term at this industry, it's shrinking. And so I think everybody kind of has this mentality of, well, we're going to make damn sure we're one of the ones that's left, right? And even though that's probably a 20-year view, if we've only dropped 200 in 6 years, then we still have a long way to go. But that competition still exists, and we're all making sure we're still going to be standing when it happens.
Yeah, and to build off that there, what moat, for the sake of a word here, what moat can an MLS build around themselves to make damn sure that they're one of those MLSs that sticks around?
I think it's member value. Some people still have the kind of that protectionist mentality, but I don't think that's the way to go. I don't think data protection is the answer. I think it's providing value to your members. Everything I look at is the juice worth the squeeze? And the juice is my value to my member. What am I doing that's making my data better for them, making their life easier, and making the market work, right? Because there's some things that we do that maybe don't directly influence the member's day-to-day life, but it is improving the industry, and rising tide floats all ships. So I that's the key. That's what it comes down to in the end, is the member experience and what are we doing to support them in their role.
Yeah. And part of member experience is working with great vendors that provide great user experiences and value to them. So when you work with a vendor, how do you judge its success within your market and with your members?
My biggest thing with vendors is I want a partner. I want somebody who we're in this business together. I want to see you succeed. You want to see me succeed, and we're going to do everything we can to make that happen. So like a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on like member utilization, like percentage of members that are actually using a product. And while I think that's an important statistic to watch, I don't think it's a be all end all, right? Because different members are going to use different things. I think a great example of this is market stats products. Like we have InfoSparks. Our member utilization on InfoSparks is about 22 to 23%, which is pretty low. Now, first off, consider that about 40% of our membership doesn't even have a sale in a year. And then, there's of the other 60%, think about how many of them know how to explain a market statistic when they're looking at it. So that takes the number down even lower, right? So what you really got to look at is the people who are using it. Are they using it in an effective way that helps their business? And are they happy with the product to the point that they don't have to go out and buy the product themselves, right? Now, that's not to say that the MLS is always going to get you'll never ever see me at an MLS that purchases a CRM for my product for my members. I think that's purely brokerage territory. But like something like a market stats product, if InfoSparks isn't good enough, they might go out and buy Teradata, or they might go out and buy I can't think of any others off the top of my head right now, but Domus Analytics is the other one I was trying to think of. But they, if they're using it in an effective way that helps them in their business, then that's a win for the MLS.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure that's where some of the stickiness comes in too, for them wanting to continue to engage with your data and use it in new ways, and vice versa. Your engagement with those members is key for retention, right? So do you think, so that go into your thoughts on, you mentioned 40% of your members don't make a sale in a year or list a property. Where does your head go with that? That seems like a big number. Does that worry you? How do you think about that as an MLS?
I don't think it worries me. I think, looking at real estate is a national pastime now, right? They talk about real estate porn, right? Yeah. It's just, people just like doing it. And sometimes it's just to be nosy, quite frankly. They just want to see the inside of their neighbor's house, and I think there are people that get their license and they hold on to it just in case they have a family member come along where they can capture that commission. But they're still logging into the MLS. Like our FBS utilization is 97%. 97% of our members log in once a quarter. So, that's including that 40% that's not in making a sale.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So, I think that's part of it. I think a lot of those people are trying, because it's a difficult business to break into. It's a very low cost business. It's probably the lowest cost business to break into as far as, barriers to entry, but it's hard to generate leads and get momentum going. So it doesn't worry me because the people are engaging and they're using it and they're finding value in it, even if they're not making a sale. Yeah.
So part of that question is, as a technology vendor, as a startup, when we come and we work with agreements on MLSs or associations, it's thinking about how to structure those is unique and what's beneficial to each. And when you have 40% of maybe your members that, aren't engaging or selling a property in a year, let's just say sell a property in a year, how should vendors be thinking about agreements with you all? I think that's a small piece of it. Because for instance, some MLSs or associations like to do site licenses, and you've got to take that number into consideration. Talk about how you all think about agreements, and maybe if you guys have a preferred way to build agreements around vendors.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely like per member per month pricing, and the reason for that is if you look at an MLS. I'm going to steal a phrase from a friend of mine, Justin landed on this. An MLS is a collection of PDFs, right? Like, especially in our case where we don't own our own software, we own the rights to the database, but we don't actually manage the database ourselves. That's all done by FBS, right? We have our bylaws, process, policies, and rules and regs, which are PDFs, and we have our contracts with all our vendors, which are PDFs. So the nice thing about the per member per month model is that if our membership goes down, so do our costs, right? So it keeps us flexible. So, if we were going to have this huge member crash that everybody thought was going to happen this year, that for the record, I don't think is going to happen this year, our costs would go down with it. So that's why we like it. Now, the flip side of that, and where the per member per month model gets difficult, is then you start having the conversation with people on the board of directors like, oh, well, if 40%, if these people don't log into it, you shouldn't charge us for that. Yeah. Right? But what has to happen there is people have to realize that the pricing is already done in a way that
heavily discounted.
Right. It's already heavily discounted for that reason. Right?
Yeah.
So yes, we do like them per member per month because of the flexibility of it. But there's also issues with that way of thinking as well. Right?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Justin Landon. I'm in Lexington, so he's our CEO here in Lexington. He was one of the first that he's been so huge for Simba. He's going through a lot right now, separating out the MLS from the association. It sounds like so working together hasn't happened as quickly as we'd like, but he connected us to so many amazing people through the industry, and he was the first that I had to go through these discussions with because he liked site licenses. He likes to provide technology to his members for free, and so he was the first that we've had to figure out how to negotiate an agreement around these kind of discussions that you and I just had right there, and your insight there. So that's funny you mentioned him. I don't know if you remembered I was in Lexington or not.
No, I didn't. No, not at all.
He's been great.
But and while we're talking about agreements, though, I want to make sure Council of MLS has a content management best practices guide. And I think because a lot of MLSs, like the way we handle agreements, especially for like a site license kind of thing, is we just take your agreement and then we redline it, go back and forth until everybody's happy, right? But if you want to know what I'm looking for in an agreement, so you can go ahead and have it that way when you send it the first time, the best practices content management and Council of MLS is great. It's publicly available to everybody, even non-members. So that's something that I highly recommend vendors start with. Like when you're building those agreements and you're going to be presenting to a MLS for the first time, that kind of gives you an idea of where our brains are, what we're going to want to see, how we want the data handled, things like that.
Interesting. I just Googled that myself. I didn't know that existed. I've been
councilofmls.org.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we had our attorney spin up an agreement, and who knows if it's close or not. That's a great resource.
Yeah.
I guess building off of that question, that leads me into a question. Within the industry, is there like an on-ramp that you've seen for vendors, brand new technology startups? So for instance, that might be a piece of the on-ramp. It's like almost like when we create a company in the space, there's a resource we go to and there's these steps. And maybe it's an educational style process. Maybe it's forums where we come in and we share, hey, here's what our technology does. Guide me to the right thought patterns, resources to get into the market efficiently. That's part of the reason I wanted to start this podcast, is to provide other vendors with this kind of information. I haven't seen it. Are you aware of maybe something close to that? Does that need to be built out better for vendors and startups?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the two organizations you all need to look at is CMLS, Council of MLS, and RESO, Real Estate Standards Organization. So starting with CMLS, I talk about best practices. You go to the website, you click research, they're all right there. So there's some best practices in the industry that kind of give you a really good look into how we run our businesses, right? And I've helped on a couple of those, and we spend a lot of time on that to really put that information out there so people can understand what the MLS is, right? It's not my Major League Soccer, right?
Yeah.
Most people have no clue. Then also with CMLS, they have an education program called CMLX, and I'm don't quote me on this, but I'm relatively sure anybody can take CMLX 1. And it's the way I describe it to people is it's like a MLS focused mini MBA. It kind of shows you how the MLS runs as a business. Then flipping over to the Real Estate Standards Organization. So first off, standards, thank God, right? I mean, we've made a ton of progress there, so they do a lot of great work. But RESO has a program called Red B, or Working with Real Estate Data, WWRED. And that's another one that's a great on-ramp to learn how MLSs approach licensing, why standards are important, how the standards work, things like that. And I know RESO has Red T coming out, because Red B is kind of the business focus. Red T is the technology focus. So that's going to be even more important for tech vendors when that comes out. Sam DeBoard might kill me, but I think he said later this year. But I know they're working on it. We'll say that.
Yeah.
Much.
No, I'm familiar with RESO. I went to my first RESO last year, and it was an eye-opening experience. I loved it. It was I keep saying it. It's one of my favorite conferences I've been to because it's a good mix between like a heavy on the nerdy and tech side, but also the relationship and kind of the networking environment they create was great. Because I'm more of, I love the tech talk. I'm not a developer, but I love having those conversations and thinking critically about technology. And there was a lot of that, but there was also the networking side where I get a lot of the value to take my company to market. So I love the RESO conference.
Yeah, exactly. That's the, those two organizations both get the big picture, right? And it's full of people like me who are trying to help get the big picture out there to consumers, to tech vendors, to other MLSs. We have to look at ourselves as this. What was the phrase someone used the other day? It was Greg Robertson. I'm going to give him credit on it. He called it the operating system of the American dream. And I really like that.
That is amazing. That's great.
That's good stuff, isn't it?
That's great, because actually one of the things that attracted me to this industry was my background's software and startups, building companies, building software products. I started buying real estate as an investment, and when I started buying real estate and engaging more with the space, I started to realize there's this data layer. And once I dove into the data layer, that's a rabbit hole. I mean, it's amazing. The MLS is such a rabbit hole, especially from an outsider who's not already engaging in the space. And that's actually one of the things that got me so passionate from a technology perspective about real estate, is I saw so much opportunity that the majority of the net worth in the world, the largest percentage of net worth in the world and the most net worth in the United States, is living on this database. And that just was so attractive to me. So I love that. The database of the American dream, is that what it was?
The operating
system of the American dream. I love that.
He said that at a MLS summit last week, and that was good stuff.
That's money. How do you discover new technology?
Usually through conferences, talking with my industry peers, seeing what everybody else is doing. One of the when I do talk with vendors and they're trying to break into space and understand it, one of the things I explain is we're kind of a cool kids club. You have most MLSs aren't going to do anything until it's been done somewhere else first. One of the first questions you're going to get is, where have you done integrations with? And if your answers are, you've got a couple of those cool kids on board, then people are a lot more willing. And what ends up happening a lot of times is, we talk a lot about the difficulty of getting through that data layer, right? But then you finally break through it. You've got your one implementation, you've got your cool kid, and then it explodes. And then you have a problem with scale. That's the number one thing I tell every vendor is plan for scale. Because if you're not able to scale up quickly and it takes you a year and a half to launch because you weren't prepared for that, nobody else is going to sign with you and you're dead in the water.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that makes me think, how do I align some of those, either the first integration and build that pipeline to know there's more coming with venture funding and making sure that I'm building the business in an intelligent way to scale. That's something I think about frequently, and that's something I work through. That's fundraising is a full-time job, and I'm in the middle of that. And so thinking about, that component of scaling with MLSs and knowing how kind of fragmented and messy it might be with our fundraising and giving us the runway to do that, I think it's important. That's something I'd like to discuss more maybe on some other podcasts I do with this series is that piece, because having runway to make things happen as a startup in this space is really important because it moves slow. It's not a space where I've been in other spaces where you can raise a lot of venture capital and kind of bulldoze your way into it with, spending a lot of money on marketing, spending a lot of money on tech, and it just kind of a product can go viral. This is not an industry where a product can go viral because it's so decentralized and fragmented. You've got to go market by market, and that presents a problem to founders for fundraising, a big problem, because you've got to strategize fundraising with rollouts within markets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned it earlier about that balance between quick and easy rollout with customizability, right?
Yeah.
And that's where, RESO does such a good job is the closer, I've got my whole organization, all the way from my committees to my board, rowing in the direction of we need to be RESO native. And the reason for that is if a vendor comes along and they want to work with us, and the only development they have to do is essentially flip a switch because they've already got a RESO standard build out ready to go, they're going to be a lot more willing to work with us, versus having to put in developer hours where, a developer brand new out of college is making $200,000 a year right now. Development costs are expensive. Oh man,
I wish, yeah, no, 100%. That's our biggest line item within our company is our developers.
100%, right? So, and that's where standards are just so important. And that's, we talked earlier about where does the competition come in and how do you make sure you're still standing at the end? RESO standards.
Yeah.
I think that's 100% the answer.
Yep. I see that too. Transitioning to the last couple questions here. Let's talk about the future. I got two questions. They're both opposite of each other. What makes you most worried about the future of the MLS network across the country?
I think, and this statement applies to both MLSs and realtors. We all say that we're real estate experts, but what we really are is residential resale experts, right? MLSs do a really poor job in general of handling things like new construction or rentals or co-ownership or land. And there's a lot of changes happening in the market that are going to necessitate us to move into those spaces very quickly. Like I have one theory that, we've got solar, we've got wells and septic. We now have things like Starlink that can get you data anywhere. So what's really holding people to the cities? Access to hospitals, access to grocery stores. So everything in human history is cyclical, right? I think we might be heading back to a cycle where you see coming back of your small communities, like back in the day when everything was kind of built around a church. You had a church, you had a package store, and then you had all the community around it. And I think you might see that. And if you look at your companies like Walmart, if you look at Dollar General, and you look at the strategies they're employing with like Neighborhood Market, for example, I think they see it coming too.
Yeah.
And so what that means, land's going to need to be sold. New construction going to need to be sold. millennials more and more are renting. So we need to be the central source of truth for all of these places and not just residential resale. So that's that's probably my worry, is if we're going to be able to move fast enough on that.
I love that answer, because things are moving so fast within the trends and ways people are housing themselves. For instance, I'm 27, so I'm within that demographic that's having a really hard time buying a home right now. Affordability is the worst it's ever been. I grew up in one of those markets, a small market kind of built around a church. It's a larger one. I grew up in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. There's about 30,000 people, so it's not small by any means, but it's one of those kind of markets that feels like that. And especially there's plenty more of those around Kentucky. But with that answer, I think it makes a ton of sense that an MLS needs to be thinking about how to support rentals better, given my generation's being forced to move that direction, whether they like it or not. So rental, like that lifestyle, is becoming more popular, and we're being pushed that. I don't like the fact we're being pushed that, because I believe in ownership and having equity, but that's a generational shift that's happening. And so I think MLSs need to be paying attention to that. And then we need to be building more housing. So new construction needs to be a big part of that. That's one of the biggest things I think the government needs to figure out, is how do we incentivize more new home builds? And I think that MLSs need to be thinking about that. So I love that answer. Last question. Go ahead.
Well, just one more thing on that real quickly, actually. And that's actually why we're doing rental beast in our area. Because rentals right now, if a consumer is looking for a rental, they have to go to 20 different websites. They're not getting a full view. So we're bringing in rental beast to create that central source of truth for rentals, right? So that's that's a focus of what we're doing, and why we're heading that direction is to start creating that central source of truth for things other than just residential resale.
Yeah, it's so interesting. How far along is that with rentals? Because I know it's not been a focus, and it is messy. I remember when I was in college looking for rentals, I'd go to several different sites, Zillow, apartments.com, whatever it might be, and listings were different from one to another, and that's where these MLS comes in. Where are we at with rentals adopting kind of MLS or rental technology?
I think we're like the 5th or 6th customer for Rental Beast. I know we're the first one on FPS. One of the things that Rental Beast does that I think is really interesting is they get the data from the source. So like if a property manager uses something like Buildium or Appfolio or one of those type products, they're getting the data from them. So whereas right now, my MLS right now gets maybe 500 or 600 rental listings a year, Rental Beast is bringing me 5,000 to 6,000.
Yeah, that's so cool.
So that's a big piece. I'd like to see MLSs get on board with it a little faster, but I think they're kind of waiting for us first 5 or 6 and see if it works out. Right?
Yeah.
We're all kind of in the if you build it, they will come mode.
You're the cool kid.
And everybody's kind of waiting to see if they come.
Yeah, you're part of the cool kids. Is there a list of cool kids somewhere I can look at?
Honestly, just go to the conferences and see who's on stage.
Yeah.
It's the people that are doing the cool stuff are the ones that are on stage talking about it. MRED, CMLS, MetroList, Bridge, those are always some good ones. I don't know if I'm quite in the cool kids club yet,
okay.
But I think we're doing cool stuff. So,
yeah.
It's Stellar is another, FMLS, Georgia MLS, the biggest guys. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of great stuff going on in the space. Triangle, I mentioned them earlier. So I don't know if there's any one exhaustive list, because we all do cool things, but we do different cool things, and some things work for others and some don't. You're right. So, but yeah, the conferences are always a great place to kind of, see what kind of cool stuff is being talked about and get people excited.
Cool. Last question. What gets you excited, about the MLS network future?
2 things. One is that, a decade or more ago, especially before the first DOJ lawsuit, everybody kind of had a very protectionist attitude about data. And I think since then, it's been a lot more pro-consumer, pro-competitive, open up the data, don't be a data vault. And I think that's great for everybody. I think that's awesome for consumers. I love the fair housing perspective of that. I love the more data access we can give out to companies like yours, the more innovation and more competition happens in the industry, right? So no longer, a lot of the legacy MLS vendors, like Flex, Matrix, Paragon, or Black Knight, they are, I don't want to say they've been sitting on the heels, because all of them innovate, But when a one like what's that one coming in out of New York? I forgot the name of them already.
Oh, Perchwell.
Perchwell, thank you. Yeah, when companies like Perchwell are coming in, or now Remind is building a new MLS, you have AMP with Stratus coming in. It's creating some angstiness, right? And I like that. That's good for everybody. The more pressure we can keep on it with innovation and competition, the better it is for all of us. So that's part one. And then driving that is, of course, RESO, right? I mean, that dream of standardized data, flipping a switch and you're turned on. I don't know if it's a dream that's going to ever be 100% realized, but if we can 80% realize it, that's a huge step in the right direction, right? So very excited with what's going on there. And then, also with, CMLS and the MLS industry is actually starting to get in the room with your Fannie Mae's and your Freddie Mac's and your industrial level data consumers and things like that. And it's I think the MLS is really poised for a true golden age coming up because of all this work we're doing to make the data flow.
Yeah. No, that's what got me so excited about this industry when I first got involved in it was, again, I saw this massive database that has so much potential. It already is responsible for so much value. And the fact that it wasn't open, the fact that there were lack of standards across the board, interoperability was low for technology companies like mine. I was just like, oh man, this is a space I could spend a lot of time in and get super passionate about and excited about because it's a technology problem, but it's also such a human problem. And I think my strengths are like one of those bridging those two. And so that made me excited as an entrepreneur. So I love that answer as well. Well, thanks for joining, man. Richard, it's been fun talking. We'll do some more of these and hopefully both MLS executives, association executives, and startup founders and vendors can get value from these conversations. And I think they will from yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I was so happy to come on to this is we do need to bridge that gap. So thanks for doing it and thanks for having me.